Hello, and thanks for clicking on the video. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you mixed together Space Marines and the 4 elements that are often shown in pop culture magic systems and TV shows like The Last Airbender? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to do in this video. This is the first of a 4-part series where I'm going to be making elemental Space Marines, and this one, in the first week, will be Earth. This project is going to involve a little bit of kitbashing, but I'm not experienced with kitbashing at all, so I'm just going to keep it very light. I'm going to set myself a few rules to keep consistency between each video, and I'll go through those rules throughout this first video. But the first thing I'm doing here is I'm choosing my parts, and this is a massive part of any kind of custom miniature that you're making. As this Marine is going to represent the element of Earth, I wanted him to be stoic and big, so I chose a wide-legged pose. I knew I wanted to give him a power fist because I was thinking rocks and earth, and I wanted him to be able to pick up big rocks and smash those rocks or throw them with his big fist. I don't own all the Space Marine parts and all the different guns. I only have a few sprues, so I didn't have a lot of choice, so I chose for him the biggest gun that I think he could have easily wielded with one hand. There are a lot of potential arms you could have used here. You could have given him a shield, you could have given him another power fist if you could find one. And yeah, you could have gone crazy with this, but like I said, don't have that many pieces, so this is what I had. And I thought, I'll give him a gun and then he could still shoot things. And then I chose him a backpack, and I chose one that had these antennae on them, which I thought was really cool. There would be a reason why I'll do that, but I'll keep that a mystery for now. And then I gave him a normal Space Marine head, but I'm thinking about doing some customization to that, so you'll see how that goes. And then a normal shoulder pad, and I want every single one of my 4 Marines to have at least one normal shoulder pad so I can draw a symbol on it. And then the other shoulder pad I want to do something custom with. I then arranged a bunch of other gizmos and accessories, including some landmines and some pieces of bark that I might use on the base to plan out what I was going to use for this miniature. Not all of this got used exactly. Some of it there wasn't room, and some of it I decided to change what I was doing halfway through. That's the fun of kitbashing. You just kind of discover something new to work with. And once I had all my pieces laid out and I knew roughly where I was going, it was time to start doing some of the cutting up and preparing of bits before I started gluing them together. So the first thing I wanted to work on was this axe from a Votan guy that I had in my kill team. My thoughts for this Earth Marine were, what if he worked down in caves, deep underground in caves? That's really earthy, and it will probably make everything a bit easier if I work to that theme. And if you work underground, you definitely need a pickaxe. So I turned this axe from the Votan into a pickaxe for him. I had to chop loads of the arm away and all of the hand off and smooth things as best as I could in order to get this as an accessory that I could then glue to the miniature later. I think it's kind of fitting that he has Votan equipment because they would be like his natural enemies underground. So then I thought, well, what else do you need underground? And I've given him this normal kind of gun, but I could make it a little bit more exciting. So I chopped up a scope and I turned it into a torch that would stick to the top of his gun. Next up, I wanted to play around with that giant landmine. I just thought it would be so cool for him to be carrying this big landmine around that he could then use to blow up rocks or to cause cave-ins or something. So again, I chopped the attached arm off of it, and then I scraped down the hand and got things as best as I could. When I was looking for the axe part in the Votan kit, I noticed this huge missile launcher, and I just couldn't resist getting this ready. So I chopped all of these pieces off of the bottom of it, and then I tried to make it so it was a normal flat cylinder. I won't spoil exactly what I'm going to do with it, but you could probably guess. It's going to be pretty cool. Also, the little underbarrel piece I've just cut off there might be useful for something in the future, so keep an eye on that. And after I chopped a few more bits away, I started to have just a blank sort of cylinder missile launcher thing. Then a wild milliput appeared, and I decided to put it to work doing some sculpting. Nothing too complicated, I pretty much just used it to stick some crystals onto this shoulder pad. As you'd find crystals down in caves and stuff, it felt very earthy to me, so it was perfect for this Earth Space Marine. I messed around for quite a while on how I wanted this to work, and I ended up cutting down the crystals a bit, and I ended up using 3 crystals instead of 1 crystal, just to create a bit more dynamism and a better, cooler silhouette. I went back to that piece I cut off from under the missile launcher, and I cut it at a diagonal angle, and then I decided that I was going to stick it to his head, as I wanted to make it seem like there was a torch in his helmet. I then also wanted the torch that I just cut for the gun, and you might be thinking, why have you got 2 torches? That's crazy. But if he drops the gun, he still needs a torch, and he's never going to drop his head. So unless someone takes his helmet off, he's always going to have one or the other torch. And 2 torches are better than 1 in the darkness when there's all scary, horrible things around trying to kill you, right? I quickly glued the missile part to the other missile part, and then I stuck a crystal on his shoulder instead of the little bullet that was on it before. And that was most of the subparts done, so I started gluing him together. After I added the 3 crystals onto the shoulder, I decided to use real little rocks from the Vallejo diorama effects to create rocky textures, because I thought actually that would be easier than trying to sculpt those rocks myself. So then it was time to glue on the arms, and I started with the Power Fist arm, and then I did the gun arm. With the arms dried and locked in place, I then stuck those shoulders on, so you can start to see how the crystals are going to change up the silhouette here. And then I dry fitted the helmet, but I didn't glue it into place yet because I knew that I was going to do some stuff on his back and I wanted to make sure his head would still fit in place. So yeah, I wanted to show where it was, but not stick it in. Around the back of the miniature, I took that giant landmine bomb thing and I stuck it to his bum, basically. Then I chopped off the antennae off the back of his backpack because I wanted that raised panel for something else. And by something else, I mean the giant missile launcher that I prepared earlier, because look at this, it's amazing. I know it's not canon and there's probably no way the power pack could really support it, but it just looks so cool up there behind him. And if he's in the middle of a cave and he wants to cause a cave in, or he's got loads of enemies around him, it's like a Hail Mary of missiles that he can just use to fire at everyone. And to make it seem more like it was deliberately meant to be there, I created this little support out of milliput that would help make it look like it was properly attached to the backpack. Right now you've got a pretty good idea of where I'm going, but I thought I'd skip to a reveal, so here's him primed and finished. So you can see he's now got that head with that torch on, he's got the missiles on the back, I glued one of the antenna back onto the other side of the backpack, he's got his torch on his gun. When we go around the side, you can see there's the crystal dangling off his shoulder, and I glued the pickaxe on hanging from behind his shoulder pad, and then there's the big mine under his backpack, and you can see the back of the missile launcher. It's a little bit messier than I'd have liked, but it's still okay, and we can cover a lot of it with paint and stuff. The first thing I painted was the most deep parts of his armor, so the black undersuit, which is always really tricky to get your brush into on these Space Marine models. So this is a great thing to paint first. I also wanted to use the black paint here to cover everything that was going to be metal as well, because I know the metal would cover over a black base coat much better than a white or light grey one. I mentioned some rules at the start, and one of those rules is to keep a blank shoulder pad so I can draw on it, but another one of the rules is that I have to do some form of custom kitbashiness. I have to add some other key thing. It can't just be a normal Space Marine painted red for fire, for example. Something similar to what I've done here with the crystals on the shoulder or the missile launcher on the back, but for each respective element. And another thing I wanted to do was I wanted to paint all the upper parts one colour and all the extremities and lower parts another colour. I'm hoping that will create consistency and make all 4 miniatures look like a set when they're done. So I'm using charred brown from Vallejo to paint the chest and the shoulders, the head and the backpack. With that finished, I then use Sandry Dust to paint a lighter base coat all over the legs and arms. I thought about using silvery metals for the trim on the shoulders and his Aquila on the chest, but in the end I just really wanted to use this recipe I'd used in the past that I really liked, where I mix flat earth with a grey, in this case charcoal from Vallejo, and it gives me this really brown grey that I really like. And then as I highlight it up into more of like stonewall grey and flat earth mix, I get a really cool light grey brown colour that just I thought really worked and is really earthy tones, so we'll work on this model hopefully. To keep the gun simple and to keep it in the earthy tones, I just painted it charcoal without any mixes, so it was just a solid grey. I did the same for the missile launcher and the big landmine on the back as well. The crystals around the base and on the shoulder were going to be an accent colour, and I originally played around with the idea of using a yellow, because I know in some games and things they use yellow, and I googled this really cool picture of an earth elemental that had yellow all over it, which was really cool. But in the end, I just thought the yellow was too samey with the Sandry Dust, and I wanted something that contrasted a bit more, so naturally picked green because it's a super earthy colour. So after making that decision, I covered all of my crystals in that green, but I left the torch on the head and the torch on the gun a yellow for now, but I'll tweak those with some white paint later. I gave the tips of the missiles a quick coating of red to help them stand out, and because I think everyone's used to seeing red tip missiles in pop culture. A giant bomb means danger, and so I had to paint the big circle area on the middle of the bomb a red colour, because in my mind it's some kind of either giant button or giant glass display thing to show everyone how dangerous it is. I then painted the lower part of his backpack brown. For some reason I painted it Zandri dust to begin with, but it looked like an isolated island of colour in the middle of the top half, which was all brown, so I just changed it so that it was all brown. I had to do multiple coats for a solid opaque coverage, and then I decided to start doing edge highlights. But before I committed to a whole set of edge highlights, I did some testing on the leg and then some testing on the chest just to see what highlights I wanted to use. I ended up going with a much more saturated orangey brown rather than a sort of dry chalky grey brown. And I also tested highlighting the brown grey parts as well, and was really happy with the highlight that I was mixing up there. With the testing done, I had a quick look at the model, and then it was time to start committing to the highlights proper. I stuck to a pretty simple highlighting of 2 highlight layers, which one was a bit of a chunky highlight and the other then a thinner final edge highlight. And I worked slowly and meticulously around the model to make sure that every edge I could find was highlighted in one of the 3 main colours I'm using here. For the Zandri dust, at this stage, I also decided to do a shade where I added in some darker brown to my Zandri dust in order to create a shadow recess mix that I could then add into all the recesses around the armor. That would just help things stand out more. And for the brown parts on the top half, I did come back and do this later on with a darker brown. I don't know why I didn't do it at the same time. It's just the weird way my brain works when I'm painting these miniatures. Before I moved on to the second layer and the final highlight on each part of the armor, I decided to give the base a quick base coat. So I used charcoal for the rock, and then I used a leather brown from Army Painter just to start painting some muddy ground area around the rocky areas. The idea was that because he's underground, he's in a cave, he's got crystals, and he's on this big rock piece, and there's mud around as well. I did a quick highlight of grey over all the black parts on the inner armour and on the tubing on his power fist. And then I used a lighter grey to highlight all the charcoal areas I'd put on the landmine, the missile launcher and the gun. And with most of the highlights on the model at this point, this is what I had. It should give you a pretty good idea of the direction of this model and roughly what it will look like by the time we're done. I definitely couldn't leave those crystals just a flat green, so I began to highlight them up. I was adding both yellow and ice yellow to my green that was a pro acryl green, and I was making increasingly more yellowy greens to highlight my crystals with, and just adding slightly more of it to the top as it got brighter. So with the crystals done, I had a quick look at those, and then I wanted to give some love to the torches. They had been this solid yellow that looked a bit weird, so I added a white dot to the center of both. I thought the white would look more natural. There's a tiny bit of yellow left around the edge of the ring as well, so it will sort of emulate yellow light in the future. Next up, I added Agrak's Earthshade over the whole base to create some shadows. Then I went around with a metallic paint, which was dark silver from Pro Acryl, and I covered all of the areas I intended to be metals. You can also see that I added some white to my red here for the landmine and just added that in rings up to the center, getting brighter, but I'll change that in a bit, which is why I haven't shown it. I did a second round of highlights on the metals with some silver mixed into the dark silver to create a brighter color. And I went around all the metal parts and then just gave them that highlight. I think I did another layer as well where I added even more silver because I think that first one didn't stand out as much as I wanted it to. I used a really bright saturated red from Vallejo to paint the tips of the missiles. Then I used that same saturated red to add some layers to the light on the back as well. And then I'd forgotten to highlight the rocks on the shoulder, so I made sure to do that with the same grey-brown mix I used on the shoulders and the Aquila. I then revisited the light on the back and I added a red ink over the whole thing. To highlight the rocks, I added ice yellow and some of the browns that were on my wet palette to the charcoal base coat, and then started to highlight up with more ice yellow in each brighter layer. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I like to do this scratchy, rough, textury stuff for my bases because it's quick and it's easy, but it gives a nice effect. And I even took the base up to a 4th layer of highlight because it just gave it even more depth and dimension. I did a really similar thing to highlight all of the mud areas around the rock as well, where I just added ice yellow and some other browns and things into the leather brown that I'd used for the base coat. Using just pure ice yellow on its own would have desaturated my highlights a little bit too much. So in the end I added quite a bit of yellow, but it gave me a too yellowy highlight, so I had to use a sepia ink to pull everything back together. And then I'd do one final highlight that had a lot more brown in it. I don't have a lot of practice with OSL effects, and it is definitely something I want to explore more in videos on this channel, but for now, a quick and easy tip is that you can use a yellow ink or some other colour ink to emulate a bit of light and to create a really basic OSL effect on your miniatures. So for his head and his gun, I just used yellow ink to create a little bit of a tint of yellow on those surfaces. Looking at the miniature, I thought the brown areas needed a slightly brighter highlight, so I did a quick pass doing increased highlights on those areas on the upper parts that were brown, and then I decided to start freehanding a white symbol on his shoulder pad. My initial idea for this was to do kind of 2 mountain peaks, but I didn't think that turned out very well and I thought it might look a bit boring. So I decided to get a little bit more abstract and do a diamond shape with the middle cut out. I thought in its basic form, it kind of represents a gemstone, which is very sort of earth focused. But mainly it was easy for me to do. I didn't want to paint a Picasso on his shoulder here, so I just wanted something that would look effective and simple, but would represent earth. And then the main final step on this miniature was I took a little bit of sponge, and I'd never done this before, but I dipped it in a bunch of paint, dark browns mainly, and I dabbed it all over the model. My thinking here was that if he's down in a cave and rocks are falling on his head as he's fighting people and bullets are flying everywhere, he would have loads of dinks and little marks all over his armor. So I decided to go to town and just weather everything up. And then with that stage done, it's time to reveal what the miniature looks like at the end. So here he is. I hope you like him. I had a lot of fun making him. I can't wait to do the 3 other parts of this series for fire, air and water. If you've got Space Marines lying around or you want to buy some, I hope I've inspired you to have a go at something like this. You can set your own rules and go as crazy as you want. You could actually make the Marines actual elementals, or you could just have it like me, that their gear is just tailored for the environment they're in. If you're curious about how the next parts turn out, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'm going to go get started on the Fire Marine.